Hello, welcome everybody. As we are getting started here, I am so excited to see lots of familiar names, new faces as well. Welcome to everybody. I'm Georgina Donahue. I'm the Director of Community here at Pragmatic Institute. I have the very great pleasure today of being joined by product growth and analytics leader, Rachael Maltiel Swenson. You are absolutely going to love everything that she has to share with you today. We are primed for a really great discussion about how you can apply analytical approaches to really supercharge all of your product decision making in your kind of day-to-day and then also in your larger projects. So thinking about how you really help to improve the efficiency, the velocity, the impact of all of the work that you're doing. So as folks are starting to hop on, we are going to start, as always, with a question in the chat. So tell me in the chat box if you could magically solve just one analytic problem or challenge for your team, what would it be? What would your magic genie wish be to solve for something analytics related? While you're entering those into the chat, make sure that you do that in the chat box below. There are two spaces for you to contribute. The chat box is really the best place for you to swap ideas with peers while Rachael is guiding us through this session. And you'll want to select everyone from the dropdown. The other box that you have down there is the Q&A box, and that's the best place for you to log your questions that you would like for Rachael to answer directly. I'll keep an eye on those through the session, and then we will have a Q&A towards the end. So definitely put your questions in there and we can get to as many of them as we can. Another little piece of housekeeping, this session is being recorded and you will all automatically receive a copy to your inbox in the coming days. So don't worry too much about intense note-taking, or if you have to pop off 10 minutes earlier, so you will receive a recording version. All right, housekeeping is out of the way. Rachael, we can pop on over to the next slide, please, if you don't mind. So welcome again, everybody. My name is Georgina Donahue. I'm the Director of Community at Pragmatic Institute. Our community is all about supporting your work and really helping you bring the best practices for product marketing and product management forward. We've got over 30,000 other product professionals that are there to really exchange and network and share practical solutions with you. Another thing that I absolutely love about Pragmatic's community is we get to bring really great conversations like this forward to you. And so there's a lot more that we can dig into there. Now, the community space is exclusively for alums. So if you're not a Pragmatic alum yet, I would love for you to become one. And we actually have a flash sale available today. So if you're not yet a Pragmatic alumni, I think you should become one. And if you use the code product15 at checkout, that's going to get you a discount on your first Foundations or Foundations on Demand course. So Foundations is an introductory session that really teaches you how to make sure you understand the products, the problems that your market is having. You have a really operational way to validate which opportunities are the right fit for your business, and also helps organize the roles and responsibilities on your team. So it's a really impactful course, and I encourage you to join, and it will also transform you into an alum, and we'll get to spend more time together with resources like this one. Callie will drop a link down below for everybody. I am ready to pop to the next slide, Rachael. Thank you very much. So today we are going to jump right into analytical tactics to inform product decisions. And really this is about aligning your metrics to your strategies to make sure that you create impact-oriented prioritization and you can measure and really make decisions with confidence. I am so excited for you all to meet Rachael. She has managed top performing global analytics and product growth teams for really incredible leading brands like Meta, Intuit, Pinterest, many more. She really has dug into this area, and it's her passion as well. She's really focused on using data to drive impactful business decisions that are able to inform your strategy and fuel growth forward. So in conversations with Rachael, it's really clear that she believes deeply in the power of unlocking that impact through intentional growth methods. And I'm just so delighted to have her with us today, and delighted to learn from you more, Rachael. So I will pass it over to you, and really looking forward to this.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Georgina, and thank you for the warm welcome. It's been fun seeing the analytical things that you all are hoping for in the chat. And so hopefully you'll walk away with some ideas to help you on some of those as you go back to your product. So today I'm going to talk about analytical tactics to guide product decisions. Before we jump into that, just a little bit about me. So I am a product growth and analytics leader. I started my career at Bain & Company, strategy consulting. And I had this hunch that data was going to be useful for making business decisions. So I decided to go get my master's in statistics. Luckily, that hunch proved to be correct. And data has been pretty important for making business decisions and, just becoming more and more important as more and more data becomes available. I then went on to lead analytics teams across both marketing and product areas at Expedia, Pinterest, eBay, Meta, and Intuit, and led a product growth team at Meta as well. And recently, I've actually switched gears and started my own company, Art Growth, offering coaching and consulting, bringing these sorts of approaches to a wider array of people and products. And lastly, this may surprise people, but I believe that we are more than just our companies that we work at. And so I've included a picture of my family here. I'm also a mom to 2 little kids, and try to be really involved, help lead the Girl Scout team and volunteer at the preschool. And I just call that out because another talk we could have on another day is just about being a working mom in an area I'm really passionate about. So jumping in, data-driven. It's kind of a buzzword right now. I'm sure everyone here is incredibly data-driven and just is like perfect at being data-driven. We all know we're supposed to be, right? Like you can't admit that you're not data-driven when working on products and in tech companies these days. So first, I'm going to share a little bit about what being data-driven actually is and why it's good. And then we'll spend the bulk of the time talking about tactics that you can actually use to be data-driven when building your products that will set you up for more impactful investments. Why to be data-driven? Data enables effective, efficient, and impactful decisions. And there's all sorts of different things that data can do. First, it provides a common language. We now all know what the goal is and what the direction is if we're aligned around the metrics that we're using. It also enables objective decisions with a methodical approach. I'm sure we've all been in those rooms where we're trying to figure out, the decision between 2 different options. And if we don't have data, we might just be left to whatever the VP in the room feels like at the moment, right? But if you have data, you have an objective way to approach what you're going to do. And it's also predictable. And so now team members can be empowered. If you know what you're supposed to be doing because you have metrics aligned and you know what matters, now you can make those decisions, and it's not just depending on whatever the leader woke up thinking that morning. It also enables easy comparison and prioritization. If you have a lot of options in front of you and you can compare them with data, you have something to work with, and it's not just, again, what the most senior person in the room thought of that morning. It also unlocks the discovery of new opportunities. You can find things that you didn't even realize were opportunities in your product. And it enables teams to be focused on the most impactful opportunities with limited resources. So hopefully now everybody's signed up and committed and ready to become more data-driven. This is the world you can live in if you use data and analysis to guide your decisions. And so now jumping into what we'll actually talk about today, a couple different tactics that you can use with analysis to really guide your product decisions and ultimately create more impactful results. And so we'll be talking about first success metrics, then funnels and segments, opportunity sizing, and lastly, experimentation. So first, success metrics. Success metrics provide a proxy of the strategy to enable decision-making. So a good success metric is just a placeholder that helps you quickly evaluate, are we going in the right direction of the strategy? It's a proxy of what the overall vision is. There's a lot of different types of metrics. And so you need to start by being really clear on what you're using a metric for and using the right metric for that purpose. So lots of content here, but I just kind of wanted to talk through this taxonomy of different types of metrics. First, there's North Star metrics. This is the big picture metric that captures the overall strategy for the organization, and it should relate to ultimate good for the customer, not just good for the business, but good for the customer. This should be used across the entire company or at least a large organization, and there should only be at most a small handful. In a perfect world, there's one. Examples of this would be things like monthly active users, revenue, nights booked. If you go in Google, you can find lots of examples of North Star metrics for leading companies to get inspiration here. Second, leading indicators. So this is a metric that measures a step that has been proven to ultimately lead to growth in the North Star. That proven point is really important, making sure that what you use here and you treat as almost a stand-in for a North Star metric, that you really know that it's something that will ultimately lead to the North Star and the overall strategy. These can be used across a team or for an entire organization. And to give some examples, Facebook discovered that for new users, if you got at least 7 friends, connected to at least 7 friends within your first 10 days on the platform, you were very likely to retain. And so even though the ultimate goal, the North Star, was more around long-term retention of new users, this metric enabled a way to measure it within just 10 days of a user joining the platform. So it gives a much faster signal on if products and investments are laddering up to the overall strategy. Purchases within 30 days would be another great example if you're more of an e-commerce site going after long-term value, but you really want to focus on what you can measure in the nearer term. Next, operational metrics, and this is what people often think of as metrics, and these enable daily decision-making by looking at the performance and health, and they directly measure what's being changed. And so these are the bread and butter of what a lot of is being used within a team, and this would include things like load time, click-through rate, bounce rates, all sorts of things like that really help you figure out what's going on in your product, but aren't necessarily the big picture of why you're building the product, but still give you lots of information to improve and optimize the product over time. Next, we have vanity metrics, and this is the one that I give a big warning, proceed with caution. This highlights the usage of a specific product or feature, but it doesn't ladder up to the broader success of the strategy. They can be useful for showing scale. Like a lot of people use my thing, but that isn't inherently a good thing, right? And so examples would be followers, number of people that viewed widget X, or % of people that clicked on widget Y. And again, it's really important that if you are focused on getting people to use a particular widget, does it actually lead to the big picture success? And so that's why I really say to proceed with caution here. And lastly, counter metrics. So these are metrics that are intended to prevent unintended harm. So it could be the North Star metric of a sister team to make sure that what you're doing isn't hurting their strategy. So for example, an ads team might have their North Star of revenue, a user team might have a North Star of monthly active users, and each other's metric is the counter metric. So the ads team counter metric is monthly active users, and the user team's counter metric is revenue, because you could do things that hurt the other's experience, and really keeping an eye on that to make sure you're both headed in the same direction is really important. Additionally, unsubscribe would be a common counter metric in the context of email marketing, for example. Okay, so that was a lot of information, lots of different types of metrics. So let me share a little bit of thinking about actually using metrics out in the wild and making sure you're using them well. So first of all, North Star, super, super important. And it's the first step in having data and analysis to really enable decision-making. This world on the left is something that I see all the time. Every team has their metric that focuses on their piece of the puzzle, and then they're just hyper-focused on that and not keeping track of the big picture and the overall strategy. So this example would be for like an e-commerce with some sort of email marketing, and the landing page team is worried about visits and bounces and load time, and the checkout team's thinking about conversion, but they're not all thinking about it together. And on the right side, we have a world where the organization has actually taken a step towards an aligned North Star. What does every team actually care about in this scenario? purchases, right? If you build a wonderful landing page that does fantastic things with load time, but it doesn't lead to any purchases, that's not success. And so really focusing on what the big picture and the overall strategy is in your metrics is really important for metrics to actually be able to make this sort of decentralized, empowered, objective, predictable decision-making that I was talking about at the beginning. So North Star, a great starting place to really think about and make sure that is widely understood within the broader team or organization. So next, a couple other metric watchouts to consider, and this is where you start to use a metric shown in the table previously in the wrong way, and you can start to run into problems. So first, treating an operational or vanity metric as a leading indicator. So let's say you're the video ad team and video ad revenue is doing amazing. It's super high, highest it's ever been, but revenue isn't moving at all. You're just cannibalizing from other ad types. That would be using an operational metric as a leading indicator. It's also kind of using a vanity metric as a leading indicator. So you need to be really careful if you're focused on your piece of the puzzle, that it's laddering up to the overall big picture. Another example would be 1 million users have used your product component. Well, great. Does it lead to anything that's part of the overall strategy for the company, right? Like viewing a page, using a specific button, that's not actually the goal of what anybody's trying to build. And so really make sure that you don't get too overly focused on your part of the puzzle and remain a view of the entire picture. Second, not having a counter metric. So you've done a great job driving email open rates up to unprecedented amounts, and unsubscribe are also at unprecedented amounts. Might be great for a very short time, but it's going to be a problem when you are losing all of your email subscribers. Another example would be reducing call center contacts, people who call into a call center. Those are super expensive. We're saving money. This is great. Oh, but actually sometimes when people call into call center contacts, that's what is actually needed to get them to convert. So making sure you're really keeping an eye on that side of the story as well. Next, complicated or unmeasurable metrics. This one, I'll probably point fingers at analytics teams or data science teams as the cause of this more so than product teams. We love to build really fancy composite metrics that perfectly capture the unique and complicated behavior of our users with different weights. It's beautiful, but nobody understands it. It's going to break when we create any new feature. We can't measure it in an A/B test. It's not sensitive enough. Nobody has any idea what's happening. So try to maintain simplicity in the metrics as much as possible. And lastly, metrics that take too long to measure. We have the perfect 12-month lifetime value metric. That's exactly what we care about. We're not just in it for the short haul. We really care that our customers are with us for a long time. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. Okay, now we have to wait 13 months to understand if anything worked, right? Who can make decisions on a 13-month timeline? So making sure that you at least have proxies to measure what you care about in a shorter or reasonable time frame for what you're trying to do. So my last bit of advice on success metrics is really making sure that you know what principles you're going after when you're creating new metrics and evaluate those metrics against those principles. So this is a made-up example of a potential metric, but the principles here are completely true and ones that I would highly recommend, but you could also add other principles that might matter for your product or organization. So first, it's really important to make sure that whatever metric you have, it's actually capturing meaningful value. And both customer value, right? It has to actually be good for your end users. And two, value to the company. And really understanding where is the value created in a given metric. And then secondly, really considering the operational elements of the metric. And so a lot of that is what we've just talked about, but making sure it's simple, it's measurable, people can understand it, making sure you can actually move it, right? Are the changes you do going to be able to show up in the metric that you've actually created? And lastly, making sure that it's hard to game. There are great examples, sticking with the call center contact, you could hide your phone number and nobody will ever find your call. If your goal is to reduce call center contacts, you can hide your number and nobody will ever call you, right? It'll work. It'll be super successful, I promise, but probably not what you're actually trying to do. And so watch out for when your metric might be gameable and you can hit it by not doing what you actually really want to be doing. Okay, so that was success metrics. Now let's talk a little bit about funnels and segments. And this is really just core exploratory analysis. This is like the bulk of what people tend to think of analytics as doing, at least hopefully. And this is about breaking down the experience to understand where optimization opportunities exist. So first, talking a little bit about funnels. A funnel analysis can surface where is it not working? Where do you need to focus? And so any place you have any sort of funnel or flow, this is any like a form, a multi-step process, a sign-up flow, a conversion checkout, anything like that, please, please, please take a look at it and have some sense of where is it working and where is it not working. And so this is just a visual of Boost Instagram media from Facebook. But the example I'll actually share here is from years ago. So it was a different flow and didn't look like this years ago. And this was when I was working at Instagram. And everybody knew that there was part of the funnel that just didn't work. They knew it was bad. And it had to do with when you were an Instagram business and you wanted to make an ad, you had to connect or create a Facebook account. And this is because of how the meta ad system is built on Facebook. And so an Instagram user needed a Facebook account at the time to make an ad. And this was confusing, especially if you were in a country where Instagram's very popular and Facebook is less widely used. And everybody knew this was broken. And so I actually even considered not doing an analysis on this. I'm like, I'm just not going to surface anything new. Everybody already knows this. I don't need to do that. But I went ahead and I included it in the full funnel analysis I did. And it showed a very high double-digit drop-off rate at the point of making that account. And again, this was something everybody knew was bad. But once I went into the room and I told them how bad it was, high double digits, suddenly people had to pay attention and people had to do something about it. And this is something that Meta did end up resolving. It was a multi-year effort, many teams, like a really big investment to do it. And again, everybody knew it was bad before, but once we put some data around it and saw just how bad it was, it really got people to move to action and ultimately resolve this, even being a large investment. The other type of analysis I want to touch on is segmenting by different user types or experiences to really explain behaviors. It's incredibly common that whatever you're building or doing, it might be working overall, but it's probably hiding some segment within where it's actually broken. So that could be in a certain country or language. Maybe the translations don't make sense and you don't even realize that it's not working in that area if you don't look at, cuts by country. Or maybe you just launched something new and didn't realize that you actually broke something on mobile. And so really making sure that you're segmenting by different cuts to understand how your experience is performing overall can give you clues to where you may need to focus or ultimately fix something. And so the visual I have here on the left is Expedia mobile app, and I'll share an example from Expedia. And this was probably about 10 years ago, so an old example in the context of tech. And this was when mobile was really becoming a thing. And at Expedia, it was known that the users who engaged on mobile app and had the app were the really high value users. And so there was a lot of interest in putting a bunch of money towards mobile marketing and getting more and more people to ultimately engage on mobile and download the app. And so I was tasked with doing an analysis to figure out the value of getting a user to download the app. And I did a segment here by looking at their prior behavior. What happened before they downloaded the app? And what I found was that even before they downloaded the app, they were our best customers who spent the most money. So this is also a plug for experimentation, which we'll get to shortly. But, it wasn't that downloading the app made these users more valuable. It was that our most valuable users wanted to use the app as well. And this analysis really helped Expedia figure out what was the right investment in terms of trying to move people towards the mobile app and how much should they actually be monetarily investing into making that happen, which again, if we hadn't, cut by different user types and past behavior, we never would have really understood the behavior that was happening here. So, this is just some examples of common segments. There's likely others that make sense for your product. If you have different product types, that can be another great cut. But really making sure that you're breaking down the experience to actually understand what's happening, not for everyone, not in aggregate, but at more granular levels to make sure that the experience is as optimal as it could be. You could also have the flip of this, by the way. You could have one group where the product performs amazingly, and that could then be a great group to go investigate and evaluate further to figure out how do you get more people to look like that group. Okay, next tactic, we're going to talk about opportunity sizing. And this is about estimating the expected impact of projects to prioritize and ultimately maximize the efficiency of resources. So this is a illustrative example here, but if you compare the overall expected impact of different projects, you can figure out which one you can actually do, because we're all working with limited resources, right? Nobody has infinite resources. And so you're always having to make trade-off decisions of what you actually do. So in this example, we have two different pages that we can optimize. One gets a lot of visitors and one gets less visitors. And the page that gets a lot of visitors, the idea that we have to optimize, we think it's fairly small. It can probably increase click-through rate by about 2%. So fairly small, but still something. But the idea that we have for the page that has less visitation, it's much bigger. It's a huge improvement. We think in the click-through rate for this page. So which one should you do? Well, you should just do the math and work it out. And in this case, it actually works out that the math you would get increased conversions for the smaller change on the page that gets many people rather than the bigger change on the page that gets fewer people. And this isn't always the case, right? And this won't always be how it works. Sometimes it'll go the other way. But actually having that math written out will give you something that you can hold on to when you're trying to figure out which opportunity in front of me should I actually do. And, let's say you get updated information and you find out that the increased click-through rate will actually be twice as much as you thought it would be, right? Now you can easily just go update this in your Excel spreadsheet and see what that means in terms of the opportunities in front of you. So a very common approach for opportunity sizing is RICE. You've likely heard of this at some point, and this is just reach times impact times competence times effort. And my recommendation here would be brainstorm and get all your product ideas, put these into a spreadsheet, do that math, put those numbers in, and then just click the sort button, and now you have a prioritized roadmap. Fairly straightforward. Okay, I'll also acknowledge I just made that sound really, really easy. It's not quite as easy as I just made it sound, with the challenge really being around estimating the impact. The reach should be pretty well known, right? You should be able to measure how many people are getting to whatever part of your product that you're considering your idea for. Confidence, you can even be kind of high level. Effort, again, that's going to be more about engineering estimates usually. But the impact estimate is the part that's really hard. If I knew the exact impact that the project would have, then I would be a magician and we wouldn't be here trying to figure out which project to prioritize. And so just to give a couple ideas of where you can go to get impact estimates, there's definitely a wide range of some places being more widely available, some being less available. And you're going to have trade-offs in terms of the confidence or how precise or accurate it is for your particular product. But a few places to start are industry averages, which you can find a lot on Google. User research, right? Even if you just talk to 2 or 3 people about this change you're looking to make, you might be able to get an estimate of how likely that would make them convert or how much time it'll save them or something like that. And the best, if you have it, is similar internal products. So if you've done something similar, how much impact did that have? Okay, last tactic, experimentation. This is the gold standard of measurement to attribute the actual cause of impact and only invest in changes that actually work. So if you've worked in product or tech for more than 5 minutes, you've probably had someone tell you that correlation does not equal causation, but I will be here to tell you that again. And experimentation is the method to really understand causation. And so what an experiment is it's making sure that you use randomization. So any given user has an equal chance of being in group A or group B for a simple A/B test. So totally random, which group, which experience you end up in. And one group is getting the control, the experience as it was before. One group is getting tests, so whatever you're changing in your feature. And that enables us to understand the incremental impact of the change. So we can pretend that these smiley faces I have here are users in a checkout funnel, and A is the people who had the old checkout funnel. And even in the old checkout funnel, there were some people who were still going to convert and purchase. And B is our new updated checkout funnel where we've made all these wonderful changes. And now we see that more people are converting with this improved checkout funnel, but we know what it is compared to the old funnel, not just being unaware of who would have checked out anyways, even with the old experience. So why should you experiment? In my experience, working across a lot of different companies, lots of different products, different maturities, different levels of optimizations, I have seen that more than half of experiments do not impact the goal metric in a statistically significant way. And this has ranged. So I've seen as low as only 10% impacting the goal metric in a statistically significant way, up to, on the high side, you have 50 or 60% of your launches actually work and impact the goal metric. And so if you're not experimenting and you're just pushing everything out the door, more than half of what you're doing is probably a wasted effort. Wasted at best, as in neutral, not actually impacting the goal metric, but could potentially even be negative. Maybe you're harming your customer experience and you don't even realize it. And if it's something that requires maintenance or continued upkeep, you're continuing to invest into that thing that's not actually working. And you haven't learned what works to now be able to put your investment against better opportunities in the future. So hopefully I've scared you a little bit into at least considering experimentation to really make sure you're actually using your resources on the things that matter and will really get benefit and use your resources as efficiently as possible. So great, now we're all bought in, we're all going to experiment. What should you actually experiment on? You can experiment on most anything. Sometimes you have to get a lot more creative on the methodology of the experiment setup. That's a really good opportunity to pull in your analytics team to brainstorm with you on that. But you can experiment on anything from small to large to really ensure that the change actually ladders up to the overall customer benefit. So first, front-end and user interfaces changes, super common area to experiment. Entry points, content and value props. I've seen really small changes in the word on a button produce huge impacts. There's this is a very old example from Facebook, but they changed the button around advertising from saying boost, from saying promote to boost. And that was a huge change in terms of the number of people understanding what the feature was and ultimately advertising. Buttons, colors, looks, all sorts of things like that, great areas to experiment. And, these small changes add up. So you may think whatever you have is fine, but if you can actually understand what works and really only take the thing that works, there's probably a lot of optimization opportunities just on the user interface. Marketing and advertising is another really important area for experimentation. It tends to be harder because it tends to be off the surface you own, right? If you're trying to experiment with your Facebook ads, your Google ads, but marketing analytics is a wonderful entire function that has put tons and tons of thought into good approaches here to get at the value of the marketing investments you're making. Back-end model changes, maybe you're changing something in your ranking or your targeting or something like that. Again, really well set up for experimentation. And these last two examples I'll touch on just a little bit more since they're less commonly used scenarios that I see, but really, really, really impactful when done well. One is migration. So, let's say you've completely changed your front-end user interface and you're going to change it all at once. This is a really good area to experiment. Usually when you do a big change like that, it will actually be negative at first because you've moved people's buttons. They don't know exactly how it works, even though this is like the wonderful, better user interface that your design team has invested deeply into. It probably is going to be a little bit negative at first. But if you do an experiment and you hold out a subset of users from this new experience, or the other way, you only give it to a small subset of users, you can understand what the impact is, what's breaking, what's not breaking. As an example here, Facebook several years ago did a big desktop user interface change, and it actually hurt businesses in terms of, since businesses disproportionately use desktop versus mobile, it hurt business engagement. And this helps us understand what parts of the business experience it was breaking, which gave us the clues that we could then use to actually go fix it. And also really made sure that we got it to a solid working place before we went out and launched the experience to everyone. And lastly, long-term product holdouts. This would mean that for some significant feature in your experience, you don't give it to a subset of users, so you can always know the value of it. So example, let's say you have some sort of notification, and for some small subset of users, you never give them notifications. And then 3 years down the line, when you get into a discussion and there's some VP who thinks that notifications are spammy and bad, and we should just turn off all notifications, you actually have the data to be like, well, actually notifications, drive monthly active users by this much, and it leads to this much revenue, et cetera, et cetera. And now you can have this objective, informed discussion about the impact of this bigger product feature for your overall user experience. Okay, lots of information in not too much time. And so now it's your turn. Where are you going to use these data-driven approaches to ultimately increase your impact? Is it success metrics? Is it funnels and segments, opportunity sizing, experimentation? If your desk looks anything like my desk, you probably have a Post-it or a notepad someplace in your vicinity. So I really do encourage you to write one thing down. What's something that you actually want to do, or go, evaluate more broadly with your team that could help your organization to make better decisions. So I'll let you write that down while I keep going. As I mentioned at the top, I actually just started Art Growth, which is a coaching and consulting firm, bringing the wealth of experience that I've built up to a wider array of customers and products. And so my services include strategic analytics for decision-making, product-led growth tactics and teardowns, data storytelling and training, fractional leadership and advising, as well as executive coaching. And so if these are things that you're trying to bring to your organization and could use a little bit of help to make it happen, please do reach out to me. I've included my email address and my website here, and happy to do a free consultation or office hour to really understand more about what you're looking for. So with that, I'll let Georgina tell you a little bit about what's happening next month.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, so next month we have a really kind of a different session for you that you won't want to miss. We're going to be talking about your agile approach and how that dovetails with the pragmatic framework. So that session is going to be led by Pragmatic Institute instructor Dan Corbin. So if you know and love Dan and trained with him before, you'll get to see him again. And if you have not trained with Dan before, it's a really great opportunity to get a taste of what that looks like. And we'll be focused on the topic of Agile in your organization, which is always a really hot topic and wonderful, good information that comes out of it. We are going to move into a Q&A right now. So I see there are a number of questions already in the Q&A box, but if you have others that you would like to pose to Rachel, please go ahead and do that now so that we can jump in. All right, so let's take a look at what we have at the moment to chat about. So the first question that I wanted to ask you is, do you think that there are differences in this approach that you're working with, Rachel, when you're dealing with a B2B product versus a B2C product? Obviously, visitors, bounces, et cetera, means a lot, especially depending on the scale of the business and the product that you're working with. So are there any adaptations you make for B2B versus B2C?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I would actually say matters here more so than is it a business or is it a customer is just volume. And to color that up a little bit, when I worked at Meta, I was technically in the B2B part of the company. I supported business and advertising products. So B2B. But Meta has over 2 million business or 200 million businesses on its products on a monthly active basis and over 10 million advertisers. And so I mean, that's a scale that even on the consumer side, many people would hope to have. And in that case, B2B, B2C, exact same, right? Because you have enough data, you have enough scale that everything that I've talked about, you can still do. So it's not inherently about, is it a business or is it a customer? Because I mean, businesses in some ways are also customers. And it's really just about the quantity of data for what you can do with that. So, if you're a B2B experience and you maybe only have 20 people coming to your website, on a day or something like that, then some of these tactics will be more challenging just from a volume perspective. And there may be other approaches that may offer more for you in certain circumstances. For example, user research and actually talking to the customer will be super important if you have a really smaller quantity of customers. But it's really just about that volume of customers. And if you're in a B2B experience and you have a decent amount of volume, then I would really encourage you to think about these tactics, because many of them can still apply, right? And even if you're working with, sparser volume, you can still get some starting insights and see what that surfaces for you.
And then what about the differences in season for a business? So thinking about the seasonality effects on your data, do you typically rerun some of your analysis programs to account for seasonality effects, or is that something that you would kind of return to different approaches? How do you account for that?
Yeah. So, I mean, it really depends on the context for your business of like, what does seasonality mean, right? Some businesses, seasonality might mean that like in the month of December, you get like 1.5 times as much business as in other months. And then I'll give you like a far more extreme example from being at Intuit recently, TurboTax, right? TurboTax like basically comes down to like almost a like number of days that you can count on your hand, And so that is extreme seasonality. And it did have limitations in terms of like experimentation volume and things like that. And you just had to work in the constraints that you had. So everybody loves seasonality. Like it's such a common thing of like, oh, that data is kind of weird. Oh, it must be seasonality. That can't be real. So, I would just watch out for like treating seasonality as like just this be all end all excuse that like explains away anything that you don't understand. And really thinking about what does seasonality actually mean in your business and how significant is it? And then depending on that, yeah, maybe you do need to rerun an analysis, right? But just think about it. Why are you rerunning the analysis? Why do you think that what was happening in that month or week or whatever is different from a normal week or month? Because I've also seen this just used as an excuse of like, oh, we have to be more careful, So yes, watch out for seasonality, but like put on your thinking cap and don't just treat seasonality as this like magic word that eliminates everything else.
Still some accountability regardless of the season.
Yes, please.
So there's a question here about how interview data plays into this. Do you include interview data as part of your assessments, or is that an area that is, typically outside your analysis?
Yeah, I assume by interview data, you mean some sort of like research or survey or something like that, where you're like directly talking to your customers.
Yes, that's right. Self-reported info directly from the customer.
Yeah. So in most of the organizations I've been in, there has been a separate function supporting that, generally called something along the lines of user research. So it hasn't been the scope of my team in general, but I've always very much encouraged my team to think of whatever they're learning as just as important and helpful for what you're doing. And so to me, it's more about how do these two different types of insights partner together? I would say that analysis and data, which I generally think of as more like data that you're getting for free, like you've set up some sort of tracking or tagging on your site or system, and now data just flows. That's usually what I think of as like analytics bread and butter. Whereas research is like actively going out, thinking about the questions, finding the right users and talking to them. I think analytics and data is really good at surfacing like the what. What do I need to look at? What is broken? Where do I need to pay attention? And I see research as being the most helpful for why. Because data is not great at telling you, like, let's stick with a funnel analysis. Let's say people drop off between page A and page B. Well, why? I don't know. I just know that a lot of people do, right? Like data is not, sometimes you can get somewhere with data. Like maybe you find that the people who click a certain button specifically drop off, but it's hard to figure out that why if all you have is this, aggregated bulk data. But research can so quickly, like just find 3 people who dropped off between A and B and ask them. There you go. Now you have some great answers. The thing you need to watch out for with research is finding one squeaky wheel who maybe doesn't, encapture the broader perspective of your customer base and treating that as like the be all end all. So, I also encourage you not to go the other way, only research, no user aggregate data to really understand scope or scale or anything like that. But I see them as just like, two peas in a pod, hand in hand working together. And even at Meta, we would have called them both understand functions. And when we got into road mapping, it was both analytics and research, reading out the results and using that together to figure out what you invest into.
Makes a lot of sense. And a really smart and concise breakdown of the where and the when each of those bring a lot of value. Love that. Another question that is similar is talking about customer sentiment. Would you consider customer sentiment as a success metric, or would you view it more as a vanity metric?
Great question. It could be. Both could be true. So the thing with like a customer sentiment type of metric, it's often arrived at through some sort of survey, right? So maybe at the end of your checkout flow or something, you ask people to fill out a survey and you only get like the 5% happiest and least happy people to fill out your survey, and it's super sparse. And in 1 month, it may jump way up because one person was unhappy. And so that's the sort of situation where I'm going to and it's not actually about it being a vanity metric. It's about it being like almost research just because of the limited data as opposed to, weblog data and analytics. And so then I'm going to say, proceed with caution, be very careful, right? But like, if it's a metric that you have really good measurement on, you're getting it in, a high proportion of your user experiences. It's not too spiky and things like that. It could be your metric, right? Because what it's measuring is, do customers like your experience, right? That's okay. That's reasonable. The thing that I'll nudge to at least consider is something like that is directly asking a user, did you like this, right? And it's cost to the user to ask them that, right? Now they have to fill something out and give you more information. And so the nudge that I would give is, can you figure out if your customers like your thing in a latent way? So not explicitly asking them, but like, is there some behavior that they're giving you in their product that can tell you if they like it or not? So I'll give an example. Like, let's say you're doing some sort of like AI summarization, right? You're summarizing something with this is big right now. You may have heard of Gen AI. And you could ask people, was that summary good? That would be more like a customer sentiment metric. And now you've given a little bit of extra work to your user to fill out that survey. Or maybe you have an edit feature or a copy paste feature, and you could look at, do people edit it or do people copy paste it and actually use it? And now you have a latent metric that tells you if people like it. And you haven't put any extra burden on the user. You haven't had to create some new feature of a survey to ask people this, but you've gotten the information that you actually care about. So, customer sentiment can be fine, but I'll at least ask you to consider if there's a way that you can get at that sentiment without directly asking someone.
A very reasonable question, and a beautiful example and illustration of how that might look in the wild. And I think, a lot of us that are looking for information, it's very tempting to go knocking on your customer's door like all the time. So places that you can reduce that is a big win. Question here about helping to really advocate and socialize and bring forward a stronger data practice internally in more of a advocacy or kind of convincing way, right? So there's someone here who it sounds like they have run into troubles with convincing executives or business owners not to be skeptical of the data. And so how do you best approach an owner or an exec who is skeptical of your data? And I'm not sure how to interpret the question as in, is the data itself being questioned, or is the approach of being more data-driven questioned? So I'll let you kind of answer in the way that you want to.
Well, I had the exact same question that you had about which of those it was, but also I feel like I could have written this question myself because I've definitely seen this where companies just like, I'll admit, being data driven, it's going to be a little bit slower at first, right? Like if your alternative approach is just like gut call, whatever the leader thinks the answer is, that's going to be very fast. It's also going to be wrong, at least some of the time, right? So like take your call. Do you want to be right or wrong, or do you want to be fast, right? Pick. And also, like, if you really invest in these tactics and approaches, and you build you know, toolkits and processes and all of that type of stuff, it's not slow in the long run, right? It's slow when you're transitioning and you don't have this muscle built up. But if you are doing this, it's not slower. It's actually faster, because now you know how you're making decisions. But I'll address both of the hypotheses of what this question is about. If your execs aren't believing it because they think the data is bad, then like, please, dear God, fix the data, right? Like everything I said, if the data is bad, is bad, right? Like if your data garbage in, garbage out, you can run experiments and opportunity size all you want. And if you're sitting on bad data, it's not going to lead you to a better place. I can't pretend to advocate for data-driven approaches on bad data. So, you know, really explore what it would take to fix the data. And I'll give a plug for another sister function here, data engineering, right? It's its own unique function. It's not the same thing as analytics. It's not data science. It's not product engineers. It's its own special thing, data engineering. So bring in experts on making data exist in easy and good ways. Highly recommend that. Great partners for analytics. Secondly, if it's more about the execs, for whatever reason, don't want to be data driven, they think that their own approach is better, this is too slow, something like that, then I would really try to color up. What are you going to get for these more data driven approaches, right? And like, you can even use some of the examples I shared today, right? Experiments. More than half of what you do is going to be a waste of energy if you're just throwing everything out there, right? Like find examples and use cases, and even give examples on like maybe challenges that were hard for that exec, or where they ultimately the call you guys made was wrong, and how data could have helped you get to a better place or make a better decision in that use case. So I think it's both about examples of what you would actually do, like approaches, get specific, as well as outcomes, right? What's going to be different if you now have this more data-driven approach? And it will take time. These things don't happen overnight, but you know, find your pockets of success, right? Where do you maybe have one partner who's also open to a more data-driven approach? And can you do something that you can then point to and really show, hey, look how much better the outcome was because of this data-driven approach, and use that to try to get buy-in to try in more places.
Yeah. All right. I have a question here that is just banging down the door. I think I have like 6 or 7 questions that are all about this, and you're gonna know that these are product people here. They want to know about the tools that you recommend. We want to talk tools, please. So what kinds of tools or dashboards do you recommend or think are helpful? A couple of people asking here to debate between Power BI or Tableau. We don't have to get that granular with it, but are there any particular visualization softwares out there or tools that you just really know and love?
This is a great question, and I'll also recognize that I'm potentially the worst person to ask this question to. Because, well, first of all, I'll give a little plug of why. And this is the plug that I'm going to give. Again, I'm advocating for my analytics brothers and sisters to all these product people. There's a lot of different type of analysts who bring in different strengths and skill sets. So I just gave a plug for data engineers. I am an analyst who leans really hard into the strategy and the product and what you do about it. I am not an analyst who leans into the tools. And you are going to find different analysts who have different flavors. And so this was not your question at all, but the answer I'm going to give is a bit of like, make sure you're thinking about what type of analyst you actually need. If you need someone to come in and get the data set up right in the first place, or pick the right dashboarding tool, find an analyst who's an expert at that. If you want an analyst who's an expert at figuring out what do you do now that you have the data, then you're looking for someone like me. And it's really hard to find, like, we like to think that all analysts are jacks of all trades and are going to be amazing at all of these things. Fantastic when you find those people, keep them forever. But most likely, different analysts are going to be more specialized in different areas. And so just be really thoughtful about what type of analyst you're looking for. now I'll give you my best attempt at a not great answer on tools, recognizing it is definitely not my area of expertise. As you kind of mentioned, there's different types of tools, right? And so think about what do you actually need your tool to do? Is it a dashboarding tool? Is it a data query tool? Is it an experimentation tool? And then especially now with all the AI stuff, tons of new stuff coming out that promises that you won't even need analysts anymore because it's going to like do everything for you. So first, what type of tool do you need? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And then, look into the options that exist. I personally have no opinion on, different dashboarding tools. I can tell you things that people have told me, Tableau, ClickView, they definitely have different strengths and weaknesses. So again, depends a bit on your use case. Do you want something that's super easy, like user-friendly and anyone can pick it up? Do you want something that can handle a large amount of data, right? Like really think like the same way I showed a principles chart for metrics, you could probably make a principles chart for tools to really narrow down why you're choosing a particular tool. But I don't have a one size fits all answer of what the tool answer is, but just really being thoughtful about one, what type of analyst you're getting, and two, what are you trying to use a tool for?
Yep, I agree. And I really do think that no matter what tool anyone on this call has available to them today, all of the principles that you shared and all of the different tactics are still so accessible. And it doesn't, the tool doesn't make the strategy. But of course, we're product people. We love tools. We love products. We love to know what you're using. So thank you very much for humoring that very popular question. All right, we are getting right to the top of the hour here. So I am going to wrap us up for the day. It has been an absolute pleasure to be here and to learn from you, Rachel. The comments are absolutely going crazy with praise and excitement about everything they're going to do. I'll share with you one of my favorite comments to your question about how are you actually going to use what you learned in this session today. Someone said, I can admit that we have been snow blinded by our Google Analytics because it just measures everything. And I'm going to go back and we're going to work really hard on North Star metrics and then kind of start building from there. So really great takeaway there. Lots and lots of examples of takeaways in the chat. So thank you very, very much.
That's awesome. I'm excited that there's one company out there that's going to have some new North Star metrics.
I think there's probably a lot more than that out there after this session.
Amazing.
So you're spreading North Stars all over the place. So if you'd like to reach out to Rachel, please do so. Her contact info is up on the screen, and I believe Callie dropped it in the chat for everyone as well. So please go ahead. Another reminder, we do have an opportunity if you have not trained with Pragmatic yet, if you'd like to be a Pragmatic alum and take foundations, the code is product15 for 15% off your first course with Pragmatic Foundations. The code is only good for today, so it is a true flash sale. So if you've already been thinking about it, today is your day. And with that, I will catch all of you next month. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your wonderful questions.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you so much, Rachel.